Welcome to the Happily Family Conference. We are your hosts. I'm Cecilia
And I'm
Hilkey,
Jason Hilkey.
and we're delighted today to have Jennifer Miller with us. For over 25 years, Jennifer Miller has worked with educators and families to help them become more effective with children through social emotional learning, with coaching, curriculum development, and consultation in Ohio and nationally. She is the author and illustrator of the blog and upcoming book, Confident Parents, Confident Kids. Welcome, Jennifer. It's great to have you again.
Thanks for coming back in, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me. It is such a delight to talk with you both, and I'm excited about our topic today.
We are too.
Yes.
So fun to talk with you. Actually, here, I'll just read real quick. So we're going to be talking about food a little bit here, and I just want to read a little something that you passed on to us so that people understand, like, you have some background in this. This isn't something you just dreamed up.
In addition to being a social and emotional intelligence expert,
which is a nice
Yeah.
pairing of the two. So you've served as the Director of Safety, Health, and Nutrition for the Ohio Department of Ed. And you were overall the USDA school lunch, early care, summer, after school, fruits and veggie programs. You've also written a curriculum for Local Matters, which is a local nonprofit that trains parents and teachers to run nutrition education programs. And that's in the Columbus Public Schools. And it's called Food Matters. So, I'm very excited to talk to you about this because it's one of the things that we get a lot of questions about and parents talk a lot about, that food's tough, and kids eating is tough. And
mealtimes and
it's not just for like young kids. This is like all the way through, like up into teens. I'm probably later after that, but like we're experiencing this with teens even. So it spans the whole range.
Yeah. So I wanted to just ask you first, like, you're an expert in social and emotional learning, social emotional intelligence. How does food and meal times kind of fit into that? Where's the overlap?
There's so much overlap, right? Food fulfills us physically, but it also fulfills us socially and emotionally. If you think about all of our celebrations, our holidays, when we want to connect with friends and family, it is always over food. Food kind of is the central convener of our social relationships. And also emotionally, in really positive ways, it adds to our sense of well-being. It gives us satisfaction. It can give us joy. It can fill us up in really positive, healthy ways. And in unhealthy ways, we can seek out food to boost energy when when it's depleted and we look for candy or sugary snacks. Or we're sad and we need something to fill us up or comfort us. So food is inextricably tied to kids' social and emotional learning, and we have an opportunity to influence it every single day. So it plays a really important role.
Yeah, and what I think is really interesting about your work is that you work like one-on-one coaching parents, but you've also done a ton of work at the policy level with the Department of Ed. So when you have your policy kind of hat on, curriculum development hat on, why do you think that this is such an important issue to be talking about kind of in a larger perspective?
Well, I'm going to pick up my piece of paper because I have some interesting statistics for you that I think when I did the research for this, they were shocking to me. 1 in 7 preschool kids are obese now, and that has increased dramatically over the past 20 years. And there's a higher risk at younger ages for diabetes now. Here's another one that I think is fascinating. 1 billion hungry people in the world, 1 billion overweight people in the world, and 43 million are children under 5. Wow. So that's interesting, the food imbalance that we face. And then just in the US alone, 30 million people suffer from eating disorders. So what that tells me is how we educate children about their relationship with food is absolutely critical to their health and well-being down the line. Just a couple more. Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. In other words, and 1 in 5 anorexic deaths are from suicide. So talk about being tied to our social and emotional well-being and development. It very much is. And then an issue that you may not think about is substance abuse or use and abuse for children, and particularly as we look at the teen years. Anything that we take into our bodies, children need to learn about how that impacts their bodies. And so actually talking about understanding how food impacts your body can also help them become more aware about substances and how they impact their body. So there are many really important social, bigger picture reasons that we educate our children about their health and nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so then it gets me really nervous, because then I'm like, okay, so I just want my kid to eat their peas. I mean, not really,
Right.
but really. Like, and at the same time, I don't want to scar them. I don't want them to become one of these statistics. And I'm wanting, to be able to talk to them and not just have them eat the food, but I'm wanting to have a conversation and not damage my relationship with them. So it gets really like
With like a power struggle.
Yeah, just with the power struggle of it all. So
Yeah.
how can we put parents at ease? How can we make this not like yet another thing to stress out about and another thing to like worry about? But how can we, and I'm not discrediting these stats. I mean, these are very important, and it's good for us to know this. And for many of the people here, I think they already probably are concerned about their kids eating, and they just really don't want those statistics to their kids become that. So how can we support parents in knowing, the day in, day out of like, my kid's eating, so it doesn't become a power struggle?
Yeah. Well, I do think that it's important to talk about your eating habits and mealtime when you're not sitting at the table. Kids can feel on the spot, right? And it can feel like a pressure cooker, especially if you've already had power struggles. When you sit down to a meal, that tone has been set from past experience. So I think it's really important to get away from the dinner dining room table, wherever you eat, and talk about your eating habits and your meals. And I created this for you. The USDA has this nice food plate. What I did with my son, and I encourage parents to do, is to talk with your kids about what their favorite foods are in the context of nutrition. So we know that that veggies should represent a large portion of what they eat, and we know that good whole grains should represent a large portion, and et cetera. So how can you brainstorm together those specific foods? Like, my son likes broccoli, and he'll eat carrot sticks, and he'll eat fish. And so we write out and keep on the refrigerator his favorite foods, and we make sure that we have snacking options on there, because kids are snackers, and you want them to be able to take care of their own food choices at a certain point, so that they're selecting healthy food. So I think talking about it is really important. When you're talking about it, I think also setting some expectations around how you're going to be at mealtime is important too. So, if you set a positive goal, like, let's all be present at dinner time. What does that mean? If we're all present to one another, we really want to connect. Well, that definitely means we have to turn off devices and put them away. They need not be at the table, so we can fully focus on each other. And then we can think about, like, what are those challenges that typically spur us to get upset or get into a power struggle? One of them is often, kids will say, yuck, this is gross, or, they will somehow express themselves that they do not desire the food. So instead of getting to that point and getting mad, pick a phrase that they can say to you that's acceptable to you. I don't like this food. I'm not going to try this today. Or this doesn't look good to me. Kids need to be able to have acceptable language to be able to say, no, thank you. I'm not interested in this. You want to raise a child who listens to their body, that is assertive enough to be able to say and confident enough to say, I'm full. And we say, okay, you know, you're full. You don't have to eat another spoonful because you're saying you're full. We trust you. Only you can understand your body, right? So I think kind of preparing and talking about some of the expectations for time at the table ahead of time really helps do well when you're at the dinner table.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's like what you've said so far. We could probably just talk about that for hours. I mean, there's so much that you just said that's really just fantastic. And I just want to you go for it. I know you want to ask something, and I just am really amazed with what you're talking about there, because each one of those, you know, like talking about it away from the table, giving them the ability to say no, essentially, like I'm full, like being able to respect that, being able to give them words to be able to express themselves
no,
so that
thank
we
you.
aren't affected, you know, than us having our own wherewithal not to be upset because we just spent an hour fixing dinner and now they don't like it. I just giving them choice, giving them the ability to put together their own lunches based on the plate that, you know, the things that they already like, and putting together something from each one of those groups so they can create their own food and their own snacks. Like each one of those is just a big topic in itself. It's fantastic. I really like those. And we could talk about each one of those, I'm sure, separately.
Yeah. And it's just reminding me of what it was like when our kids were a little bit younger. We had kind of a separate list, a little bit like your food plate on the refrigerator, that had, they could pick one thing from each category to put in their lunch. So that was a way for them to get balance and have autonomy and choice, and for me to not have a power struggle with them. And they were making some choices. So that was really nice.
And I also think that we didn't do a great job at them understanding like the different pieces of putting together a meal, you know, their choices around food. That's one of the things that we've had to kind of like catch them up to speed on as they've gotten older. Like we could have done that earlier on. I wish we would have spent a little bit more time on it. They had lots of great choices, but not understanding necessarily like how they all went together.
What's so great about that, though, is that you involve them in packing their lunches, because just that involvement in picking, they had a choice, and then they contributed to their lunch, makes a huge difference in their appreciation of their lunch. And then they bring gratitude to a meal when they're more involved. So that really sets a tone for meals when you involve them. So I really like that.
Yeah. And they were not only picking, but they were actually making their lunch.
Yeah, right.
Starting really quite young. I think they were like maybe 5, 6, 7 when they started making their own lunches. They got away from that, but they started out really good.
Yeah.
Once they became adolescents, they got away from that. So,
anyway,
now we're just trying to make sure they have food in their mouth before they leave the door.
Right. Yep.
I want to step back because I can imagine there are people in the audience that are like, okay, great, Jason, Jennifer, that stuff sounds good, but my kid isn't going to fill out that whole plate. My kid is on like the bread and cheese diet, like the white brown diet.
Yeah.
If they fill out the plate, it's only going to be in the grains category with maybe some protein.
Yeah.
What do you know about picky eating? Should we be freaked out about it? Is this just a developmental thing? What happens long-term for these kids?
Picky eating is intimate in my life. I was a picky eater, and my son is a picky eater. And, you know, I think the number one thing to say is that picky eating is not detrimental to a child's health and well-being. So that's number one, because I think picky eating can cause a lot of parent anxiety. And as we get more anxious, it loads pressure on our kids, and we've got this emotional contagion going where we've got the pressure cooker around eating. And so they say it takes 6 to up to 15 exposures to a new food in order to encourage a picky eater to try it. 15, that's a lot. So, but I brought this, I ran to the market before, and I suppose, I'm guessing, knowing you both, that you're very healthy eaters. But I thought I'd give you some empathy for our young children who are experiencing foods for the first time. Can you see this pretty well?
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Brussels
Have you
sprout.
seen it before?
Okay.
Like a mini cabbage.
Yeah, something like that. If you saw a tray of these at a party, would you take a bite?
Probably not. I go for
Probably,
the Doritos.
right? Yeah. But so this is, if you unwrap this is a tomatillo,
Oh,
which I'm sure you're familiar with.
right.
So if you actually piece it open, you can see the
Tomatillo.
the green tomato. But for our kids, foods are new, and especially when it's a lasagna or it's a mix of foods together that we think is amazingly delicious, they are frightened by it. And I will also say that there are a lot of valid concerns that children bring to the table, including allergies, which was the case with me and my son. Even if you've gotten food poisoning or you've been sick from food before, that can cause anxiety in young children about trying new foods. It can be very stressful. And then also your child's temperament. Perhaps they were born highly sensitive to not just taste, but also smells. Eating is an extremely sensory experience, and their taste buds are fresh and new and highly sensitive. So our being sensitive to their sensitivity is really important. If we're going to tell our kids to trust your gut, like when they have a safety issue, we want them to trust their gut. We want them to reject an adult that's leading them astray. Trust your gut, right? But trusting their gut also means that if something that they're looking at is disturbing to them and they're fearing getting sick from it, that we trust their gut, that we allow them to opt out. And we give them language to opt out gracefully, so that if we're in a public situation, we've practiced. They've come to us and said, "Mom, I'm not sure about this. Can I stay away from this?" And we give them permission to do that. Children need to learn to be in control of their own bodies and to listen to their own bodies. And that actually starts with parents giving them that kind of control and permission.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was just remembering some of my experience as an occupational therapist working with kids that were really sensitive, and how sensory of an experience food is, texture and temperature and different mixtures of, like the lasagna, different mixtures of textures all together and different flavors all mixed together, how that's sometimes really tough for kids.
Lasagna has a lot of different textures. That's interesting. I didn't put that together. Right.
It does.
And sometimes when we were preschool teachers and we did like little community lunches where everybody brought something to contribute. It was kind of like an organized potluck, and we sat and we pretended like it was a fancy restaurant.
Nice.
Classroom, and they took turns like pouring drinks for each other and serving each other and trying new foods and using utensils and all of this stuff. And sometimes for some kids, they didn't want to take everything, so they would avoid stuff, or and we would encourage them maybe just to like have a little bit of that different food that was just close to them.
Yeah.
Or maybe we're going to just put it on your plate for decoration.
Yeah.
Just like even those little bits of exposure, put it up to your lips and just feel what it feels like on your lips, or just smell it. And then you can put it back down. That little bit of exposure can help kind of desensitize, talking about the, like how much exposure kids need in order to try a new thing. Those are like little tiny baby steps, but they're really significant. So that's great.
And I distinctly remember parents, we would tell them like what their kids, we just talk about it after class or whatever. And we'd be talking about whatever they had. And the parents like, he ate what? He doesn't eat those. So, but that was really interesting. And that was very common, right? Like we know that about kids at school in general, that they can act very differently at school and away from the home. And the same thing with the food. And so then I started to think, well, what is it that we bring to the home, to the family, that has our kids not eat something, but they will at school?
Yeah. Or what is it about school, because it's with peers, it's normalized, that it's, more acceptable maybe to take a little bit of a risk.
Yeah, right.
That makes it easier. I don't know. But
I think there is a big difference between offering and encouraging and consistently putting new foods on their plate to expose them to new foods, and pushing and pressuring. And I think kids that get pushed and pressured, some of them put on the brakes, and it becomes, it becomes that battleground, and they become even pickier. It kind of reinforces the picky behavior because they're feeling the pressure. So it is a balancing act. But I think that offering and encouraging and continuing to whatever's on your plate goes on their plate as well, really helps for kids who have texture issues and get scared with combinations. My child was certainly that way, and when he was younger, you don't want to become a short order cook. You don't want to have to make several different meals. But what I would do is, as I was preparing ingredients, I would use the separate ingredients for his meal, and then I would put it all together for the rest of the family, so that he could try what we're having in full if he wanted to, but he also got the nutrition he needed through the separate, the lentils were here and the carrots were here, and we had the stew, but he had the various components of the stew, right?
Right. We've really complicated our kids because when they were born, we were vegetarian, and then we continued, as vegetarians for a while, and then started eating meat for a bit, and now Cecilia's kind of like maybe sometimes meat, sometimes not meat. So we're like still figuring out and this is what's interesting, right? Like this doesn't go away. This is still stuff as adults. We still are looking at what we eat, looking at our diets and figuring out.
And how to encourage our kids to eat something that's balanced.
And here we are, looking at our kids, and our kids are like, okay, so they're looking at us, trying to figure out what we're making. And so when we make meals, we don't want to be a short order cook, but it does work well for us to have them in different components and, add some things that maybe are just for you. One daughter doesn't like sour cream, another one likes guacamole. So they have different options, that when we can do that, because we are essentially cooking for, 4 individuals. And that's challenging just in life in general, right? And so trying to find 4 individuals that like all the same thing can just be challenging at any age. Yeah. So I find it interesting. Much of what you're talking about is thinking of them as people rather than something that needs to be fed. And that they're a person. Like this is a theme that keeps coming up in the conference, it seems like. It's like looking at them as people, as they're a person, and in the way we eat, like recognize them as a person. And so giving them opportunities for choice, just like we would if we were going to maybe a dinner party or we were inviting people over where people have different preferences. Same thing with our kids, like we can still offer that to them as well. I get in the mode of like treating them like a project and like it needs to be fed like a plant or something, and doesn't treat them like a person. So I really like what you're talking about and being able to separate those.
Yeah.
I wanted to shift a little bit away from nutrition and more into kind of mealtime. How can we create mealtime to be a connecting place and have it be this nice positive experience?
That's a great question. And I think, in addition to having the goal of just adding to the health and well-being of our family through food, through nutrition, we also have the goal of connecting at mealtime, especially if we prioritize being home and around and making a family dinner. Maybe we do it once a week, or maybe we do it, several times a week, every night, every other night. But when we prioritize that time and it becomes a battleground, it can really be tough because we come with such hopes for real connection. This is our chance, And for some of us, dinner is our chance. Like we come straight from work. And then afterward, it's homework, it's bedtime, it's a rush of activity. And so that mealtime can really, in some ways, feel very sacred in a positive way, but in a stressful way, it can be a pressure cooker. So I encourage parents to think about, and families to think about, how they can set a mindful tone for their family meals. I was noticing that we were racing to dinner, literally, like my husband was flying in the door and I was trying to cook a healthy meal. And so, and after getting off work, and so I was flying through cooking, and my son was outside and he was running in from playing, and we were breathless when we were starting the meal. And I was choking. Like I started a regular pattern of choking because it was so stressful. So we made a commitment to connect very briefly before we sat down. So, and it was very simple. We would just go put a hand on our son's shoulders. We would pat one another and say, "How was your day?" We would connect in a very, very small, simple way before we sat down at the table. Then when we sat down, we would spend time giving thanks. And you don't have to be a religious family to be grateful for your life. And I think it's a really important and wonderful habit to get into when you sit down, to take a moment to say, we have this gorgeous food in front of us. And mom or dad or the whole family worked on preparing it, on shopping for it. There were farmers that worked hard to get that to the store, to get it to our table. So how can we just say words of gratitude before we dive into the food? I think it can really set a tone for that mindfulness of paying attention to one another, of being together and appreciating your life together. And then it becomes much easier to get into conversations and to really connect while you're eating. And one more tip on that, and I would say this is something that a pitfall that we fell into. We really wanted, my partner and I really wanted to connect on our days. And our son got bored and wanted to leave immediately. And who could blame him? He doesn't understand what we're talking about. He has no interest in that I did a video conference today, whatever, mom, So if you can speak language, it takes some self-management skills, right? But speak kid language during dinner and introduce topics that they're interested in. Start in the middle of a sentence instead of saying, "How was your day?" So that they're on the spot. Say, I saw that there was some good fun going on the playground today. What were the games that you decided to play? But see if you can really generate conversation. And I've got some conversation starters I'll leave with you on that. But setting that kind of positive goal of how can we really connect at dinner time.
That's interesting. I hadn't considered, so I grew up in a family where we held hands before we had dinner and we give thanks. And so we continue that on in our family here. And I hadn't considered how much that was just connecting, like physically connecting, and how much of a difference that actually can make for us to just like get back together and
slow down.
Yeah, slow down a little bit.
Slow
and actually,
down.
Yeah. And just acknowledge, hey, we're here. Oh, hey, touching. I think there's a lot to be said about touch, right? And so I really like that. And we recently, our kids had pointed out to us that they didn't want to talk about schedule anymore at the dinner table. Like this is,
I
which,
get
Or
that.
logistics, like who's
or
going to drive
logistics,
who to where and how's that going to work out? They're like, stop.
It's stressing me
I'm
out.
done.
Stop it. Right?
right?
Yeah.
So like
That's
having,
good.
and part of it is because we weren't doing regular family meetings where we could talk about that stuff. This was the time when we all got together. And so let's talk about it here. And boy, so we've been having to undo that. And then early on, we struggled for a bit with our kids just staying at the table. Like we didn't want to force them to stay at the table, but we
Yeah.
really wanted to be connecting. And so we for a while, we didn't do as many conversations as we did. We started doing like games. And they had, what was that game? Table Topics? No. That's a starter.
Table topics is conversation starters. We played dinner games.
Dinner games.
It's like a little.
Yes, I have it.
too.
Yes.
Little index cards in a little case that you can just pull one out and it gives you like a little game to play, which is
Wow.
awesome because at the end of the day when we were done with work and for much of our
You
careers,
can't come up with it.
yeah,
Right?
and much of our careers we've been working with children and then we get home with our own kids and we're like, oh, I don't even know what to do with you right now.
You're so done. I know.
I'm
I
done
get
with
it.
kids and here are my own kids. So
Right.
I loved using table topics and dinner games.
And dinner games had different ages, like it
Yeah.
ranged from young, and they had a different version for the older kids. And that was just great because we then could stay. And then at that point, it was just connecting for us. We may not be having great conversations. Sometimes they fell out of that, but it gave us something to do. And
Yeah.
later we started we'd find an easy card game to do. And
Or even a board game.
I've gone back and forth on that because I want it to be a mindful time. But what was more important for me was that it was connecting. And so we've kind of played that balance out a few different times. And we have table topics for people that are interested in that. There's a link on our website in the resources to table topics because we like that so much. We included a link in there. So if you want to find out what in the world we're talking about, but I really have seen that pay off over the years, and it's just like it's been normalized. Like this is just what we do. Like we just get together as a family and we sit at the table and we eat dinner together. And
Right.
sometimes we have great conversations and sometimes we don't, but we continue to work it out. It's just like, it's what we do. And so I really like what you're describing in starting even young, just being able to get together.
Yeah.
Let's have this as a connecting time.
I will say for you very young children, toddlers, preschoolers, it can be really challenging for parents. Their attention spans are different. They're shorter and they don't want to sit at the table. And so one thing that I recommend for parents of younger children is to use a timer and to allow the child to set the timer and monitor the timer. So it's not you monitoring the timer, but the idea is we really want time with you. We love spending time with you. So let's see if we can keep you a little bit longer, even if you're finished with your food. We'd love to chat with you and then, play with the amount of time. I think when Ethan was 5, we gave him 10 minutes. And it was his own little challenge, and he really liked being able to control it. And it worked really well because it was time limited. He knew he didn't have to sit there forever. He could watch the timer if he was eager to get going, but it really encouraged him to stay at the table for a little while so that we could connect and then he could go play.
Nice. As we're wrapping up, there's one other question, and so many of these are such big topics. I feel like we're just kind of skimming the surface, but one of the big topics that I think is really important in this conversation is if we're trying to avoid power struggles and give kids freedom and autonomy and choice and all that's great, what if there really is some sort of medical issue where there is a child who doesn't do well with gluten but really wants to eat it, or whatever else, or maybe food coloring and processed foods don't work well with this child? How do you balance a true medical concern with giving kids choice and freedom and avoiding the power struggle?
That is such an important question, and I have coached parents through this process, and it can be incredibly stressful on a family when a child is dealing with a medical issue, because maybe they can't take their medicine if they haven't had a meal. And so it adds this other layer of pressure on mealtime that is really challenging, or can be, for parents to deal with. So one thing that I encourage parents to do is to spread the nutrition throughout the day. Don't rely on dinner time as the sole time when you're getting nutrition in. If you do, then it stacks it up as that high pressure time. But if you're making sure that after school there are carrot sticks available, or at lunchtime when they're busy talking with their friends, that they're getting in nutritious food, then at dinner you can say, okay, it's not all on dinner. It's not, it's not the end of the world. Even if they miss the meal and cannot eat, it is not the end of the world if they don't eat. So I think that's really important. I think also parents taking care of their own anxiety is really important, because we can inadvertently create a more stressful situation by bringing that anxiety to the table, right? So how can you, for example, if you're worried about your child's allergies or about them getting sick at the table, how can you do your own preparation before you come to the table to make sure that the foods are safe, whatever is being offered to your child is safe, that you've spread the nutrition throughout the day so you know it's covered at some point in the day, it's covered. And then you take some deep breaths before you sit down. I stick with the number 10 just so that I can remember it, but I try to take those deep breaths before I sit down so that I'm not bringing that energy to the table, so that I can be calm and relaxed, so that my child has the opportunity to experience food in a fresh way and not have that extra layer of anxiety. So, and I guess the other thing, which seems obvious, but I should mention, is that you should have a medical plan in place. So you're only going to feel secure and safe if you have a really solid plan for what happens if. Because if you're stewing in your mind about, oh my gosh, what happens if, you're going to bring that stress. So what happens if an allergen gets into their food? What do you do? What's the process? Has the family gone through a dry run? Do you know exactly who's making the phone call, who's calling 911, what steps are you going to take? As long as you have a well-rehearsed plan for a medical condition, then you can work on your own calming down, and you can come to the table realizing that it doesn't have to be high stakes, that the food experience can be a safe experience. And if children are bringing their anxiety to the table, the way that you deal with a child's anxiety is to continually give them safe experiences of eating food. So what you bring really matters in setting the tone.
Yeah.
So valuable, just in parenting in general. What we bring literally to the table makes a difference with how it all.
That's it. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to talk way, way more about every one of these topics. So we're gonna continue this conversation some other time, definitely. But as we're wrapping up here, do you have any final words or anything you'd like to go over that we haven't covered?
I guess in closing, I would say that it's really important to think about your child's relationship with food and with their body, and that all of their interactions with food, their daily interactions, are setting the tone for potentially healthy habits that they'll carry throughout their lives. And they need to have power over their body. They need to be able to say yes or no to food they're ingesting and have practice with saying yes or no. And so we as adults really have to share power with our children in in feeding them. It is not our responsibility. It really is a shared responsibility. And so when we come to this conversation about food, how can we think about allowing them to have those experiences and take responsibility for that yes or no to food?
That's so valuable. There's a lot to that in itself. I also want to point out that you have a book that's on pre-order right now. And I want to give you a little moment just to say a little bit about that book so people know how they can find out more about the other work that you're also doing beyond just food.
Yeah, thank you. So it is very related. I surveyed a bunch of parents in Central Ohio and said, if I wrote a book, what would you want? What would you want to read about related to parenting? And they said very clearly, big feelings. We care about our own big feelings, and we care about our kids' big feelings and how we manage those with emotional intelligence. And so that is what the book is about. It's called Confident Parents, Confident Kids, Raising Emotional Intelligence in Ourselves and in Our Kids, from toddlers to teenagers. And it goes by age and stage so that you can say, if you have a 3-year-old, how do you support their emotional intelligence as a 3-year-old or as a 17-year-old? So it is on pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I'll share those links with you, and it'll be released on November 5th of this year.
So exciting for that book. I just can't wait to read it. So much good content. You have so much to say, and it's so great to have it put together in a way that is easy to reference and to be able to digest.
And relatable and
totally
practical, and all your stuff that you do is so just practical and easy to, not necessarily easy to do, but clear. You laid a path for people. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So
Thanks
we'll
so
include
much.
links here in the speaker notes to find out more about the book. What's the best way for people to keep up with you online and find out everything that you have going on?
Yeah, so Confident Parents, confidentkids.org. You can sign up on the homepage.
Great. We'll include links here. And as always, it's great to talk to you. Very excited talking to you about this topic. I'm serious, like we need to have like a part 2, maybe 3 or 4, and talk about this some more. And thanks for joining us here at the conference and sharing this with us.
I would love to be able to actually share a meal with you. We're always across the miles, but I feel like we touched on the subject today, and I'm just always delighted to talk with you both. You bring so much wisdom and expertise to this work, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for being here for the conference. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.